Hi, everyone. My name is Anisha Murphy, and I'm the owner of Just Law LLC.
Hi, I'm Michelle Tran Maryns. I'm the Sparkler in Chief at We Sparkle. Welcome to our podcast, We Just Sparkle,
where we provide business advice that grows sustainable entrepreneurs who shine. Hello, everyone. This is Anisha Murphy from Just Law LLC, and I'm joined by my awesome co-host, Michelle Maryns. And you are tuning into We Just Sparkle, our awesome podcast highlighting entrepreneur stories and journeys. So thank you for joining us this month. This month's theme is around partnerships. And so I wanted to hand it over to Michelle to introduce our awesome guest for today.
Thank you, Anisha. It's so nice to see everyone. Thank you for coming back and listening to our podcast. I am really pleased to introduce Suan. She is, speaking of partnerships, someone that I partnered with in the past and will probably continue partnering with her in the future. And so she has a lot of experience working with businesses, helping them to grow, helping them to do collaborations and build their business relationships. So with that, I would just like to ask the first question of Suan, which is basically to introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about your entrepreneurial journey.
Thank you for inviting me. I feel really honored to be part of the early group of guests. And yes, it's been wonderful working with Michelle. So happy to do anything for you. I am Suan Kregel, also known as Suan M. Taylor Kregel. If you ask my mother, I need to have all the names. I am a consultant, or as many of my colleagues know me as, I'm a Mary Poppins. I have a pattern of, even when I was working in the corporate world, of coming in on projects, solving issues, but I'm not the type of person that maintains. I'm the type of person who solves, empowers, and supports projects so that they can move forward. And then I like floating off with my little umbrella and solving another problem. So my entrepreneurial journey really started in the corporate world. So very early, I'd say in college, I got my degree in structural kinesiology or health sciences, pre-physical therapy, and biology, because I thought I wanted to be a doctor, but really I did not. I always wanted to be in business, had this fantasy about being like a powerful woman, running around a business situation, like telling people what to do. So when you're a 5-year-old fantasizing about that, you probably are never going to end up in the medical field because it's pretty different. So in college, I realized that I wanted to be in business, but I had this very science heavy degree, and I do love math and science. So that was always going to be a part of my journey. Once I graduated, I made my way into marketing for fitness, primarily because it matched so well with, number one, my passion, and the number two, my degree. So I could speak about it really eloquently. And very quickly realized that that was also not the right spot for me. And speaking of my very first business partnership, I would actually consider the guy who ended up hiring me into my first corporate job, who I used to train for triathlons, but he was senior vice president of media, interactive, mobile, and I'm missing one of the things, but basically the creative division within a very large marketing company here in Minneapolis. Because we had authentic and real conversations about my aspirations in life, we were just sitting around talking about how many crunches he was doing. We created a genuine partnership and a respect for each other, where when I decided that I wanted to get out of that role, he was already open to the concept of me becoming his employee. And I'd already built a partnership with his administrative assistant, through having to schedule his sessions, where I ended up becoming a shoo-in. So I think that's the earliest example I have of how I've naturally started to build these partnerships that have basically lasted throughout my career, and helped me land in positions that I never thought I would be able to be in without having an advanced degree. So that's the start. But basically the big picture is that I spent 8 years in software, incentive design, technology, doing a number of positions. And then, a few years ago, I landed at a terrible company with bad morals and just, kind of had it with the corporate world. So this was probably, I left that company like 2.5 years ago. And my very literal, very first partnership in my entire life, my mother came to me and said, "Hey, I'm trying to start a home care agency. Will you come look at stuff while you're in between positions?" 2 years later, I basically ended up becoming the architect of the baseline of her business. So she runs a home care agency here in Minneapolis. And now it's built. And because I'm Mary Poppins, I got bored. So I still help her administratively on the side with legal and different aspects of that business. But I have then, started venturing into being my own person. So my own person when it comes to business and when it comes to producing revenue and supporting myself. So I started an LLC called Convergence Point Consulting. So it's me, but I've been talking to a lot of people who are interested in kind of a similar setup. It's just trying to figure out how to get the clients in order to support additional people beyond myself with underneath the umbrella. And I've been fortunate enough to work with Michelle. I've been fortunate enough to work with the Minnesota Healing Justice Network here in Minneapolis. Pilar is a wellness writer who I absolutely adore. I had a chance to meet last summer. And we've started collaborating together on some business strategy. But my overarching focus as a professional has become, how do I help others leverage technology in order to become well and maintain wellness and vitality and be happier in their lives? So I'm a customer experience consultant with a focus on wellness technology. So Michelle knows the story is way longer. And if I told you the whole thing, it would be 30 minutes and then we would talk about nothing else. So I'll pause there. And just see if there's anything else you want me to dig into.
Oh, that was great, Suan. Thank you for the introduction. I'm wondering, and you touched on this a little bit, but how has partnership not only helped you in your business development, but also your personal development as both support staff in businesses and then also in your own entrepreneur endeavors?
Yeah, I might ask you to loop back to part of the question, Anisha, because I'm sure I'll get sidetracked at some point and forget what I was supposed to be talking about. But the first thing I'll mention is, I mentioned that like I had this very natural partnership develop with Doug Rosen. He's this amazing guy. He runs strategy at this big ad agency now out in New York City. But it was based on authenticity, right? And we had real conversations about things that we were interested in. I told him about my actual aspirations. I never felt like I had to maneuver into that relationship. It was very authentic, right? We get along. Me realizing how easy that was totally shifted my perspective on how I was going to focus on building relationships for my career. And I like to collect all of my favorite bosses as advisors. And I tell them like straight out, like, okay, so I'm going to be in your life forever. So please answer my phone call because I probably have some kind of a strategic question for you. But early on, there was this disconnect in my head. I was like allergic to the concept of networking because it felt like the opposite. It felt inauthentic, right? Oh, I'm going to go to a networking event and I'm going to talk to these people and I'm going to schmooze and I don't know, try to buy each other drinks. And it just felt gross to me. From a very honest perspective, even to the point where like people would be like, oh, you work for Doug. Can you get me a meeting with him? And as his assistant, I felt like I had to protect him from that because I didn't understand how they weren't necessarily different. They were very similar. It's just a different approach. So I'm actually looking at writing like a blog post about this, but the concept of micro partnerships. Because I think a lot of people have the same issues I do with this concept of networking. But if you refocus it as like, all right, I would love to create a partnership with this person based on value and skills that we can bring to each other, it totally shifts the conversation, and also like, like my posture about the situation. So, Doug brought me in, he, gave me a spot on a team, as a traffic manager, supporting some like being executive assistant to a few VPs and directors, as well as supporting on like a junior level, his project management team. And from there, I thought, well, if I got to know Doug and I got my job this way, right? Why wouldn't I continue down this type of a path? So I started pursuing informational interviews within the organization once I realized that the role that I was in wasn't quite right. So then it's networking, but instead it's, hey, can we just have a conversation, right? I'm interested in the role that you have. I have this skill set. Do you think it fits? What's your perspective on different areas I could go, right? And so it's this like overarching informational interview approach. So that's how I started readjusting my perspective on networking, and really what propelled my career, because that attitude has never stopped. And every time I've felt stalled, it's what's also gotten me started again.
That's really interesting. Yeah, I think that building relationships, even early in your career, I volunteer, I teach a lot of young people, and I always tell them it's never too early to start meeting with people, because you never know later on in life, how that might connect. I still have students that I taught many, many years ago who come back and ask me for, a reference or recommendation letter. So you never know, at some point when you might meet that person when they might be helpful. And I think you're right in reaching out to people and asking them for help, because people in general, I think, want to help. So what I would really interested in, as I'm aware of one of your partnerships that you're doing this year around healthy eating, and doing it in partnership with Lachelle and Jenny. So I'd love for you to talk to us a little bit about how that partnership came about, and just share that with us, because I thought it was really interesting. It's 3 different women, 3 different businesses coming together.
It's it's very serendipitous, and I'm a pretty spiritual person, so part of me feels like sometimes these things happen for a very specific reason, right? And then if you're not religious, it's like, well, it's because you were looking for the circumstances, or because it was part of your focus. Either way, it felt very natural. So this past summer, it's exactly how Michelle and I met. The murder of George Floyd spurred many of us into action, feeling like, I want to do something instead of just feel angry, right? And being not, I guess by American culture standards, I'm considered Black, but my mom is West African immigrant. My dad is a yogi from Wisconsin, right? This like German, French, Canadian white guy who was also a yogi for 40 years, which is a whole other story. Very multicultural, multiracial home, right? And so I felt like I needed to be a part of the solution. And part of that too is when you live between worlds and in this multicultural environment, it gives an opportunity to become like a translator, right? So the other weird serendipitous thing is one of the original founders of the Minnesota Healing Justice Network, who I ended up working with on a lot of initiatives, is also my childhood best friend, who I met the first day of kindergarten. She's also like from a family that's half African immigrant, half like, white American. And she's like, hey, will you come in and just see if you can give some of your like business expertise in order to support our organization? We have all these donations coming in and we don't know what to do. So that's how I met Michelle. She was my counterpart in finance. So we just split duties just because it felt better from an integrity standpoint. And also she and I have very, we have skill sets that dovetail really well together. Also, while doing that work, I met Lachelle Cunningham, who is a well-known like healthy chef who works in the Black community. And she's been a caterer. She's a food educator. She's involved in all kinds of initiatives across Minneapolis in order to support the wholeness and well-being of, basically the community here. So Lachelle and I started spitballing this idea one day. This is like, I don't know, 3 months ago, after kind of things had calmed down and we weren't doing as much like community work. Hey, Suan, you're a wellness person. I'm a chef, like, all this stuff about well-being, like we should do something together. Because what I didn't mention earlier, just to throw more diversity into my background, because of all the work I did around human performance and physiology and such, I also ended up super obsessed with, it started off being like, how do I lose weight? Because I want to, fit some unrealistic US expectation, right? Like boo. I'm beyond that. And then it became, how do I feel and look the best I possibly can for the person that I am? So I had this base of like scientific knowledge about health. And then I was bodybuilder, a boxer, actually competed once in bodybuilding. I still like do Olympic lifting and powerlifting. And I know like an insane amount about nutrition and just exercise. But then also growing up, I grew up in a very spiritually centered church that really emphasized well-being things that have become really popular. So I was a teenager oming, doing like Sufi dancing, if you've ever seen that, meditating regularly, journaling, small, like our retreats would have, peer support. And we were taught how to listen as well as communicate our feelings in a way that we felt were real to us in an environment that was safe. So I basically got a crash course on being a counselor. So mind, body, and nutrition, right? Boom. So I've been doing like well-being support and like functional training now since I was 23. So it's, oh my God, I guess I'm like 13. No, actually I was 21. So I'm 15 years deep now in this world. And I'm like a crazy health person, but I also believe in the balance between those things and making sure that you aren't putting expectations on yourself that are unrealistic. So Lachelle became a client. She's like, hey, let's combine you and me and let's do this thing. So we came up with this entity called Urban Wellbeing, and our tagline is nurture your higher nature. And so we were trying to figure out like, how do we do like a local class that brings together these concepts of food, identity, culture, because it's also concept of like a democratizing. Oh wait, how do Michelle, do you know what word I'm trying to say?
Yes, democratizing. Yes.
Yeah. The information around nutrition and well-being, because right now it is basically held under this like guise of like, just buy into this program and we'll teach you all of the things, right? You'll finally be skinny and happy if you just purchase this thing for whatever, right? Like, why are we hiding the information that people need instead of just putting it in a supportive environment where they can actually really absorb it? So Michelle then like calls up her other chef friend, Jenny Breen, who is also an educator in town, and her heritage is like Eastern European, Jewish. So like there's just a lot of like rich cultural heritage also on her side. So we're like the Jewish lady, the half Black, half immigrant girl, and then like the American Black person all together in this like multicultural cooking class, because we realized that our food stories are all so different that being able to share those and connect them to how you choosing your food affects your community, it affects your health, it affects the economy, and also how you identify, are the foods that you choose have a lot, tell other people a lot about how you identify, because your food story really becomes a part of you, because we can't separate life from food. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So the Farm Table Foundation out of Amory, Wisconsin, knows Jenny. And so they're like, hey, this is a great concept. They have this giant plot of land out in Maryns. And so this summer we're playing around with the idea of doing these live kind of retreat workshops. But yeah, that's how I ended up being sponsored by a foundation, working with 2 local chefs. Because my mom, also just to throw in like another beautiful dovetail, is obsessed with food, right? She like loves cooking. She taught me how to cook when I was really little. She learned to cook when she was really little, and she's really good at it. So she passed down a lot of her skills to me. So I get to be like the one random non-amateur chef with the 2 fully trained chef educators teaching a class and collaborating, because I'm the well-being expert is what they call me. I get really uncomfortable with that term because I feel like to be called an expert, you have to have these like certifications, right, that have confirmed that you have this skill set. I just tell you that I have advanced knowledge. I would not call myself an expert, but I can't control other people.
That's great. I know the show very well, and she is doing a lot of great work in the community. And I don't know Jenny, but I know the 3 of you all are going to create something really powerful. And I'm looking forward to participating in it because healthy eating is something that I need to get back on track. You said a lot in the last question, but the one thing that I wrote is that narratives plays a big part into partnerships, and oftentimes we can find ourselves into a negative partnership based off of a narrative. So can you speak toward to how or your experience in a negative partnership, what it taught you, and most importantly how you're applying it and showing up differently today, for those thinking about going into partnerships, or those who may be stuck in a bad partnership and is only one centered on they're doing this or they're doing that, and not really looking at the holistic perspective of what is this trying to teach me and how do I apply it to my next adventure or endeavor, whatever may come of it.
Yeah, that's tough. And I think it's even harder to, if you are in a place, or like once I found out like who I am, right, and was able to really like sit in that and be comfortable with who I am, because it can feel really personal when a partnership doesn't work out, right? I mean, that's why breakups are so hard. Even if both of you are totally on board, it's like, well, we thought this was going to work and then it just didn't, right? So I try to reframe it as it was a mismatch, right? And when I'm focusing on, or when I found myself many times partnered with someone who was not a good fit. And you don't know that right off the bat, right? So circumstances have a lot to do with whether or not that partnership works out. But then also personalities really don't fully express themselves until you have an opportunity to develop some semblance of trust. And if that doesn't develop at the same rate, that can also create other issues. So back when I was working at the marketing company, like my first corporate job, one of the VPs I supported just was not kind, right? So it's this power dynamic that becomes unbalanced because one person feels like their voice matters more than the other. And that can be rectified if there's openness to having a conversation, like a frank, uncomfortable conversation about what's going on, right? But, I was 23-year-old or 23, 24-year-old Suan, and she was, probably in like her 40s. And she had decided in her head that I had not earned the right to be respected in the same level that she was, right? So in that particular situation where there's such a big difference in power dynamic, the only thing I could really do was go to the people that did value me, that were in a position to stand up for me, clearly communicate my part in the situation, right? Because nobody's ever perfect, right? Like, oh, maybe I could have headed this off at the pass by being more communicative in this area or that, or confirmed like this expectation or that expectation. But I was never going to be able to really stand up for myself, especially in a corporate environment, without having someone else having my back, right? And sometimes that means letting them like basically be the person between you and them. right? So that's one environment where you have the opportunity to be supported. But when there is a more level playing field from a skill set and an expertise perspective, it can be a little trickier because this whole concept of politics comes into play. Ugh. I'm allergic to politics. I don't play it. I want my work to speak for itself. Unfortunately, it's just part of life. But the best thing I've found in those particular situations is to just flip the entire game board over. Don't even play, right? What I was hired to do in that, or what I said I was going to bring to that partnership is what I will continue to bring. I will act with integrity. I will show who I truly am as a person. I will treat everyone, including that person who is clearly playing games, with kindness and respect. And try to get them to a point where I can at least have like a real conversation about how we can walk away from this thing. And I mean, when you have money tied up, it's really hard, right? Like, what do? If the person isn't willing to come to terms and support the conversation about separation, right? It becomes like a nasty divorce, right? This all ties back into relationships as well. But, and in that situation, like, unfortunately, that's why we have legal documents, right, Anisha? If you set expectations in a legal document right in the front before you put money in, you're not only showing the other person that your position is respectable, but also it's enforceable. Negotiate up front, right? You don't like come back later and be like, well, you remember how I said that you could have this percentage of the company? Well, I've changed my mind because clearly you're not holding up your end of the bargain. No, it's your partnership agreements should say X percent is given to this person because they meet these expectations. They have to be met for this specific period of time if neither party, right? Like, so as much as like, I think legal documents are really frustrating for people and it can feel gross, right? Like, why don't you trust me? Why do I need a prenup, right? Like, I would never leave you, right? People are dynamic. Things change. You can never like really know what the future holds. So if someone isn't willing to have the conversation about clear expectations in the front end, and from a business perspective, having that like legal conversation, they're not really serious about holding up their end of the bargain. And it's just, I would say it's just not worth it. But then if you end up in the situation where, you can't hang, right? Things just aren't working out. At least you have that backing because you don't have that like manager to stand between the two of you and negotiate on your behalf, but you would have a lawyer. Yeah, I mean, I have a lot more to say about that, but I'll pause.
Yeah, and I mean, maybe we should give Anisha the opportunity as a lawyer to comment on that. I know that you've probably seen good and bad partnerships in your time. So Anisha and I don't know if we said this in the past podcast, but we actually met many years ago and worked for different entrepreneurial support organizations. And so we've seen many businesses, and Anisha continues to work with entrepreneurs. I continue to work with entrepreneurs. And I don't know if you have anything that you wanted to comment, Anisha, on, as a lawyer, the importance of outlining, like as Suan said, things in writing to begin with in order so that everyone is clear about the partnership and the terms.
I would just add, and why you said a lot there, but I would just add, in addition to writing it out, make sure both parties or all three parties or however many parties that you have to this partnership has an opportunity to get that document reviewed by an attorney before you execute it. And the reason being is so many of my Just Law clients are either clients coming to me with a operating agreement or partnership agreement that was not properly executed. So they're thinking, oh, my rights and responsibilities under this document was one thing when it was actually a totally different thing. And they didn't know that based off of not having that heightened expertise. that a lawyer would give you. So I would say that. I would also say, Swan, you hit the nail on the head. Is like getting something in writing is important, because what happens if you're fighting amongst each other, the courts look to see, well, what does the written document say? I don't care how you feel. I don't care how your friend feels. I want to see what is writing, because I mean it's barred really when you think about hearsay rules and the rules against evidence. Out of court statements offered in court to prove the truth of the matter asserted is hearsay and can't come in. And so anything that you can conduce to writing, and both of you, your partner, or however many partners you have to the organization, has a clear understanding what their rights and responsibilities are, the better, prior to signing. It saves you a lot of trouble in the end.
Yeah, because without it,
Yeah.
it turns into a hot mess. And that's one of the first things I did with my mom when I was helping her with her agency. She has a friend who is the investor, right?
Mm.
That is like not necessarily a good thing. That usually just means there's going to be more feelings, right? Especially when you're family, friends, and there's like integrated relationships. I was like, you two need a partnership agreement.
Mm-hmm.
Don't like just don't even try to run a healthcare agency without legal documentation, right? Talk about compliance issues, like just running the business. You want to add in potential money problems.
Yeah.
I was insistent, and we got one executed that does, favors my mom, but that goes back to what Anisha said is I don't know that her partner ever really had it reviewed from his perspective, because there was uncomfortable feelings, and therefore then there's guilt, and then you rush into an agreement that you don't necessarily feel, you don't even know if it's really like it's positioned in a way that is equal to both parties, right? Because from an integrity perspective, you don't want something to lean heavily one direction, but those two lawyers are going to balance it out, right?
And not only balance, but they'll make sure that both of you are you're protected in the event that anything happens. And that's so they make sure the contract is balanced out, and that is making sure it's not unconscionable, which it favors one party. But then they'll also make sure you know what your rights and responsibilities are prior to signing, and that you feel comfortable with doing that. I would also say too, knowing what type of document to get signed is really important, because so many people are operating in LLCs with partnership agreements. Well, the agreement for to conduce your rights and responsibilities and hold the parties liable is actually an operating agreement. So making sure that you're having the right documents, there are different documents for different things, is really key. But especially when you get into partners and you have multi owners to the business, multi owners that have say in how the business is governing, and the functionality of the business is so key to get the information conduced into writing. And it's something that you all agree on while you all are civil and like each other. Because when you become so upset with each other, it really becomes a divorce. I like to equate it as a marriage gone wrong. So business is really a marriage. When it terminates, you can equate it to a marriage really gone wrong, and both parties are fighting and really not listening to the other. But what does the written document say?
Yep. And then even it can help you resolve issues too, right?
Oh,
Because
yeah.
but that's not what I said. Yeah, it's right here in this document. Oh, it's easier to say, oh, I just remember it differently.
Yeah.
Like, let's have a conversation about it because I have these concerns, right? It's an opportunity to actually resolve issues because it provides clarity, right?
Yep. It'll provide you the clarity that you need. Yeah. That's why you should have been a lawyer.
My mom, my African immigrant mother wants me to be a doctor and a lawyer, right?
Well, I can identify with that, also having immigrant parents. But we're glad that you are a business owner, Swan. And it's so great talking with both of you. And I could probably talk all day with you because I learn so much every time I talk with each of you. So, but we only have so much time. And so I just wanted to kind of wrap things up. I think we've learned a lot today about partnerships. One of the biggest takeaways, get it in writing, just so that it's clear what expectations are, and it can clarify a lot about your relationship. But Suan, before we leave, I wanted to just ask you if there's anything that you would like to share with our audience. How can we find you? Do you have a website, social media, these healthy eating events? We're interested in those. So would you share with us how we can stay in touch and keep you up to date on your business?
Yeah. I always laugh because I'm like, how many entities do I have? But there's two main entities. So I operate as I mentioned, my LLC in Minnesota is convergencepointconsulting.com. And unfortunately, Convergence Point was taken as a URL. So it's all of it, all the letters, convergencepointconsulting.com. And then I operate my well-being and identity and race opportunities or speaking or whatever underneath a different umbrella called Unfiltered Reality. So my website is unfiltered-reality.com. And then on Facebook and Instagram, I'm 2020 Unfiltered Reality, which is still catchy, even though it wasn't quite in alignment with my URL. It totally works, right, for last year, and then also for like visualizing and clarity. And then the opportunity, like the class that Michelle is mentioning, is on my Unfiltered Reality page under the advocacy section. And that entire website, I mean, if you're interested in just generally like my perspective on race, identity, culture, I'm a very transparent person. And so I share a lot about what it's like to be a biracial person, what it's like to be the child of an immigrant, my spirituality, and all the writing that's on that site as well. So I'd say that's more of like my personal like brand versus my Convergence Point represents my business perspective and my customer-centric business design focus that goes into the consulting work I do.
Great. Well, thank you so much, both of you. It's always great to see you. And thank you for joining us today for We Just Sparkle.
Thank you.
Thank you for having me. Bye.
Bye.